Hi everyone and welcome to Curious Convos. Today we are really fortunate to have Santiago Rincon-Gallardo here from Toronto. How are you, Santiago?
Doing very well, Andrea. Very nice to see you.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I heard you speak in Marrakesh and I thought you were speaking my language. I could really relate to you and what you were saying. So let's start off today by you talking about your story. Where did everything, like what was your experience of schooling?
Yeah, well, that's a great question to start off. I was a very good student all the way through, a very good student. I was considered a very good student all the way from elementary school to high school. I had the privilege of going to a private school in Mexico City, not because I came from privilege, but more because my good grades just gave me access to scholarships that allowed me to stay in private school for my whole trajectory in schooling. I was considered to be a very good student. I did very well in school. I had the highest grades in my group every month. I would come back home with the certificate showing that I had the highest grades of my cohort every month.
Were your parents really proud every time you brought home that certificate?
That's right. That made my mother very proud. My dad passed away when I was young. I was 4, and part of my drive actually to get my mother, to get my good grades, to do well, had to do with making sure I was helping my mother, and for her doing well in school was the most important thing I could do. So in a way, for me, doing well in school was a way to give her one less thing to worry about, and something to feel proud about and comforted about. So I did very well. I got very good grades. I represented my school in many academic competitions. Sometimes I won. I carried the Mexican flag during the national anthem ceremonies, almost every morning or whenever. It was a huge honor at the time.
Huge honor. Yeah.
So I did very well by conventional standards. Many teachers would talk about me as an example of to follow, right? As someone whose peers should try to emulate. Yet I graduated from high school not knowing how to read and write. What I had learned to do in school is fundamentally learn to understand what the adults in the room expected from me and do it. I had very good short-term memory. So whenever I had to present an exam, I would be able to memorize huge amounts of information, put them in the test, get the best grade. Even if I didn't, if anyone would, were to ask me a week later, anything about the exam I had an A+ on, I wouldn't have been able to respond. But short-term memory did its tricks. I was able to manage through those tricks, getting the best grades. But what I learned mostly is to understand what teachers needed from me and to do it. What I needed to do to get the best grade and do it. I think in my particular case, that was one thing that helped me was this particular situation where my mother was single parenting us, myself and my younger sister, and we needed, I just wanted to help her, and I think that's where the drive for me came. It wasn't an intrinsic motivation to I wasn't passionate about what I was doing in school, but I learned to play the game of schooling very well, and I did. I got very good grades. The big paradox again is I left high school very, just fed up with schooling. I had some experiences that weren't very pleasant in terms of my interactions with my school principal, some teachers, etc. Because in my teenage years, I decided to start to rebel. I think I started to.
You were rebelling?
A little bit. I started to see some nonsense in playing this game called schooling. So I continued to get very good grades, but I started to mock some teachers, to offer ridiculous answers when I knew that the answer would not have repercussions on my grade. So I think I was a bit of a nightmare for many teachers and for many principals. And I think part of my rebellion came from the internal sense of nonsense that I was experiencing. That was my experience with school. Doing very well, getting the best grades, and yet graduating from high school, not knowing how to read and write, not knowing how to learn on my own. I went on to university to do studies in mathematics.
So then your transition went straight from school, you finished, and then you had a couple of weeks and went straight to university?
I went straight into university. I had the opportunity to spend some months in the mountains of the state of Veracruz, leading some and supporting some literacy and human rights projects in indigenous communities in Mexico. And that was a very, very big, important experience for me. But I went on to university to study mathematics, and using basically the same tricks I learned in school, I did very well for the first half of my career till I completed that career. Now, the thing is that there was for me, you know, my life changed when I met my lifelong mentor, Gabriel Cámara. My university went on strike. He was looking for a young mathematician to lead the efforts to support independent learning and collaborative learning in very remote communities across Mexico. His name is Gabriel Cámara, and I met him, and I started working with him when my university went on strike. And that's where my trajectory took a total kind of shift. With Gabriel, I was involved in creating a project, creating a pedagogical model that could enhance or develop or promote the ability to learn independently amongst young people in very remote communities across Mexico. And one of the things we learned with him was to stay very connected to what was going on the ground, to not to evaluate the teachers or the students who were part of this big project, but to evaluate our own strategy. The idea was to keep a very close link between design and execution. And what we ended up doing was to learn continuously about our work from seeing what was going on in classrooms. And,
Okay.
you know, yes, go ahead.
So you were saying that you didn't, you know, reading and writing was difficult for you, but then you went to university doing mathematics, but you really found your teaching, the teaching part, that's where you really focused on when you were in this project, is your instruction?
Well, before my instruction, what we came to learn with Gabriel was that if we wanted learning communities to come to life in the most remote communities in the country, we as a national leadership team had to become a learning community ourselves. Okay. We had to model with our own practice what it looked like to be in a learning community. So as a mathematics expert, we decided to create a learning community when we realized this is what we had to do. And I started to learn literature from the expert in literature. And I started to learn science from the expert in science. And I started to learn history from the expert in history. And I started to support others in learning mathematics. What that taught us is that even though we were very good, you know, the specialists in the team were very good in our areas of expertise, we really didn't know much about the other areas, even though we had good grades. So we started to learn from each other. And that's where I discovered first that I didn't really know much about history and science and literature, even though I had great grades. But I also had the support of colleagues who helped me understand many times for the very first time poems and short stories and novels that I had read in high school, that I had, you know, made exams about and had great grades about, but which I had never really understood. So the experience was experience of learning.
How did they then teach you, or how did you learn? Was it more like a mentoring, or was it more coaching, or was it more like, how did you all come together and learn together and across the disciplines?
Yeah, what we started to do was to start, each specialist would come to the group saying, look, these are my 5 favorite poems or short stories, and I can offer you tutoring in mastering this content. The mathematician, myself, would come and say, look, here are 5 really powerful math problems that I really master very well, and I can help you navigate how to, you know, navigate the process of trying to figure out a strategy and find a solution. The same with each of us. Each of us developed some kind of catalog of topics, readings, problems, and offered them for the group to choose what they wanted to learn. And what we set up then is in an environment where people could choose from the available catalog of options and have one-on-one support from someone who had navigated the challenge of making sense of the particular topic or text or problem that they were offering. So it was through tutorial relationships, that's how we call it, that we started to learn as learners first, to have the experience of learners first, and then to start to figure out how can we support others to learn it. So it was not really the teaching that helped us create this model, it was the learning. Long story short, in a short period of time, we had expanded to about 300 schools. There was some change in administration. We were asked to leave the institution where we were working, and we created a small NGO that started to bring this model that we had developed to voluntary teachers in remote communities across Mexico in a very small scale. We started working in 8 schools in 2 states in Mexico with some international funding we were awarded. And we started practicing this pedagogy with the teachers and supporting them in their classrooms to bring this pedagogy to life, the pedagogy of tutorial relationships, as it is called now, or learning communities.
I was just going to say that. So it's like the teachers are learning first, because
right.
I find a lot of the time when I worked with children with math anxiety, the teachers who maths comes very easy to, doesn't have that sense of empathy a lot of the time, because they've never struggled like they have me with statistics. I really struggled with statistics and sat in that panic zone for a little time. So I'm wondering, that sort of breaks down that experience.
It is, and it also brought us down the experience of having to learn things that we weren't very good at.
Okay,
really
a little bit of humility.
for us.
You needed humility.
It was a lot of it. And I think it helped us position ourselves in a much more compassionate position when in our connection with teachers. And we started to encourage them to choose amongst the things we offered them, topics that were challenging to them. Not because we wanted to judge them or because we wanted to evaluate them, but because we wanted them to experience what it is like not to know, and what it is like to be supported in a way that you get to learn things that you believe you don't.
So staying curious and not judgmental.
That's right.
Whitman,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It is in community. It is in a place where the work of everybody is choose something that you are really struggling with or that you truly believe you cannot learn, and be paired with someone who will be with you through the whole process till you master what you need to master. And what that creates in terms of efficacy is phenomenal. As I was saying, we started working in a few communities in Mexico with some international funding. And what we started to see was an incredible spread of this practice organically from teachers. You say, when teachers started to see that the kids were learning at the level they were learning, when parents started to come to teachers saying, hey, what are you doing to my kid? He comes to school and the only thing they want to do is to solve math problems or read a book. They're not watching TV anymore. Or when the kids started to come to the teacher saying, hey, can we have a copy of the keys to the school because we want to come to school on the weekends and in the afternoons to continue reading, to continue learning. When that started to happen, teachers started to reach out to other teachers and say, come and see what's happening here. It's a simple model. It works well. Come see, or I'll come with my students to show you this practice. In about 10 years, the practice of tutorial networks or tutorial relationships spread from 8 schools to over 9,000 schools across the entire country, and with very good results as well.
I was just going to say, and you said that it all changed because it just stopped.
There was a change in administration. There were two moments of spread of our practice. First was through the National Council for the Promotion of Education. That project, came to an end. With a new administration who decided they had some other priorities. The big spread happened through a nationwide policy that was led actually by one of the people in our team who started working on a small scale at the early stages of our project. And through her activism within the Ministry of Education, we were able to expand the practice to 9,000 schools all over the country. That program also came to an end when there was a change in administration. The group continues to support this kind of work at a smaller scale, but there are many. So coming back to the story, I think my story is one, the combination of the frustration of feeling like I was doing very well in school and yet I was not really learning anything of value, combined with the powerful experience of learning and learning about my own capacity to learn, learning that I was able to learn whatever I set myself to learn. I think that's the most important gift that life has given me: the capacity and the confidence in my ability to learn whatever it is that I need to learn or that I want to learn, and also seeing the incredible spread that can take place when you create the conditions for meaningful learning encounters between someone who is interested in learning something and someone who knows that thing and is willing to support the learner, with whatever means they have available to help them master what they know well.
Yeah, and I think when we had that conversation the other day, I really thought about, been reflecting a lot about our conversation. I spoke to my children. I said, in schools where we learn to be taught, and then we should focus more on learning to learn. And at the dinner table, everyone sort of said, if we're learned to talk, to be taught, what's the difference if you're learning to learn?
That's right. That's the key legacy of schooling as we know it. We learn to be taught. I did well because I learned how to be taught. What does that mean? You learn to sit quietly, to listen attentively to what the adult in the room is saying, and to respond to their expectations. Ideally, you respond in a way that they expect you will respond. Mm-hmm. There are some other rebels, troublemakers, who decide not to respond, and that's their choice. And I admire those who decide to resist the efforts of the teacher to get them to learn to be taught. There's a beautiful book by Carla Shalaby called Troublemakers, and what she does is to interview troublemakers at 6-year-olds, 6 or 7-year-olds, and learns about the dignity that these children have and the power of their thinking to buy into the game of schooling. But anyways, we do learn how to be taught. That's what we learn. And the problem is that learning to be taught and learning to learn are two very different things. Very different. Because learning to learn is about autonomy. It's about taking on the responsibility to decide within yourself what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. It is about making your own calls about what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, rather than expecting someone else to tell you that. Yeah. And that has implications not only for learning, which is very important. I mean, we need our kids, especially these times, to be able to learn by themselves, to learn how to learn, to know how to learn by themselves. But learning to be taught is a disservice to that. Yeah. And not only to that, also to democracy. If you think about the pedagogical core as the basic unit where learning happens or not, is the relationship between a teacher and a student in the presence of an object of knowledge, that's where learning happens or not. And usually that relationship is a vertical relationship. It's a relationship of power, of control. There's a very clear separation between who knows and who doesn't, who's supposed to know, who's supposed to not to know, who says what has to be done and who's supposed to comply. Basically, it's an exercise in compliance, learning to do as you're told. That's what learning to be taught is about. But the kind of mindset and attitudes and beliefs that you cultivate when our kids are subject to these type of relationships over and over again, systematically, almost every hour of their waking time, what you cultivate is mindsets, is values, is attitudes that are better suited for authoritarian regimes, not for democracies. In democracies, you would have a relationship between authority and citizens that's more like this, not like this. Learning happens actually in relationships that are more like this, relationships of dialogue, mutual learning, of mutual influence. Both get changed in the process of learning. That's what Hattie has been saying, John Hattie has been saying with visible learning. So learning to be taught is a disservice to learning, but also to democracy. And I think we're living in a time when democracy cannot be taken for granted. It's crumbling in many nations. And the good news is that if we change the pedagogical core in a way that the relationships between educator and student and the presence of knowledge are more horizontal in nature, more based on dialogue, on mutual care, and partnership, then you're not only cultivating powerful learning, you're cultivating democracy.
I was thinking when you were talking about in schooling, I was always the child who asked too many questions.
Yeah.
I was too curious, and you've had your hand up. I've answered your question, like I was that one. And you get to a certain age where you think, I'm not going to ask any more questions. So it wasn't until
That's
I went
right.
to university that I started staying back and speaking to the lecturer, just, you know, finding out more that way.
That's right. I have a good friend, actually, Richard Elmore's wife, Kirsten Olsen, did a beautiful research study when she went to look at the school experiences of highly accomplished people from all walks of life, you know, the lawyers and doctors and educators and politicians, business people. And the guiding question of her research was, tell me about a powerful learning experience you get in school. And instead, what she found gave title to her book, which is Wounded by School. Wounded by School. The consistent experience was one of wounding, of kids being shut down, of kids being told explicitly or implicitly that they were not good enough, that math was not for them, that they were never going to be, you know,
and a lot of the
good.
time, the students who found out what the teacher wanted, like what is
Yeah.
wanted for this subject, I have to do this, I have to jump through this hoop to get this
Yeah.
grade. So yeah, so we've talked about the pedagogical core. So that's a dynamic relationship between the educator, the learner, and the knowledge. What's the difference between knowledge and the content?
Yeah. Well, I like to use the term of object of knowledge because it encompasses more than just a narrow definition of content. I mean, the thing is, the pedagogical core can be in place whenever you're learning anything. If you're learning to cook, the object of knowledge may be the cooking. Right?
Yes.
If you're learning to play an instrument, that's the object of knowledge around which a mentor and an apprentice get together. So object of knowledge allows for a broader definition of what it is what's the it that educator and learner engage in. Content tends to be narrowed down to what's in the curriculum. What is it that you're expected to learn by mandate?
Yes.
So, and that can be, I mean, the thing is, the curricula can offer phenomenal points of entry for good interaction between educators and learners. But I like the concept of knowledge because it's broader. It speaks to the idea that what the thing that you can engage with your learners about is not necessarily confined to what's listed down in the curriculum.
And could they bring in their own experiences, their own lived experience? I know, telling the stories.
I think they have to. One thing we learn to do, and that's consistent with what research around powerful learning tells us, is that learning is really a process of using what you know and what you know how to do to make sense of new things. That's it. So what you need to do is to bring everything you have to tackle new problems, and through dialogue. That's the tutorial relationship method that I was speaking to. What you do is to do way more listening than talking. So good pedagogy, I think, is fundamentally about good listening. It's good teachers at the end of the day are like good coaches.
I was just going to say, it sounds like coaching to me.
I know. I wanted to save this quote for the convo. But good teaching is that like good coaching. It is not about telling the others what they have to do. It's about listening deeply to them and helping them access their own knowledge and wisdom and resources for them to figure out solutions. So it has to be driven. Good, powerful learning is driven by and supported by and nurtured by the knowledge that the kid already has, and also by their interest. I mean, at the end of the day, we learn well what we're interested in learning, right?
Yeah. And I know Jeremy, I spoke to Jeremy, and he said he has this question for you. What does the pedagogical core mean in practical terms for teachers?
Yeah. I think two things. So as I was saying, the pedagogical core is the dynamic relationship between an educator and a learner in the presence of knowledge.
Yeah.
The first thing is there are pairs of relationships there. So the first thing that I think the teachers that I've seen most kind of deeply transformed in efforts to change their practice are teachers who experience powerful learning themselves, who get themselves in the place of a learner. That, you know, they take on a project that they really don't know how to take on. They take on a learning project about things that they never learn how to do and feel very insecure about. All those kind of things. So you take the place of the learner, and that's where you start shifting the link between teacher and knowledge. You start to develop, again, a relationship of interaction between the teacher and knowledge that's more interactive and more horizontal in nature. It's not that knowledge is on top of you and then you have to learn it. It is you start to interact with it in dialogue. Reading at the end of the day is dialogue. You engage in conversation with an author, even though the author is not there to talk with you. Reading is fundamentally an act of dialogue when it's good. So that's the first thing, to experience powerful learning yourself. Knowing that powerful learning is not something that schools are well designed to do. Schools were not designed to promote powerful learning. So that's one, just a thought on the side.
We'll talk about that later.
The other side is about starting to be more attentive about what drives your kids. What do they love? What do they aspire to be? What do they like to do? What are things where they feel confident? What are things that they know how to do very well? What are things that they struggle with and that give them anxiety? And to be way more sensitive to what your students have to offer, and to ask more than you tell them what to do. And the thing is, I think part of the role of students when it comes to the pedagogical core, of teachers when it comes to pedagogical core, is once you get to know your kids, start to use their interests as the point of entry to other things that you may be interested in them learning, the curriculum. Right? Kids who in Ottawa, who we visited a couple years ago in elementary school in Ottawa, who are very troubled because their community is the only neighborhood that doesn't have a skating park. And they start to figure out, the teacher says, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Let's figure out what we need to do to design a skating park, and let's talk with our political representative, with our councillor. Let's hear from him. The kids did that. They understood what the legal process was, what the community engagement process was. They designed their park. They did models in scale. They decided so that it was inclusive, that it allowed for kids in wheelchairs to be able to use it and to access all those kind of things. And what the teacher was saying is, they learn so much about the curriculum without even thinking about it.
Yeah, without cross-checking it. And so it sounds really authentic.
Right.
It's like design thinking when I was doing that with my students, and they had these blue sky ideas. We just let them run, and the parents were complaining because they said all they want to do on the weekends is get together and work on this project. We don't have our weekends anymore. And I'm thinking, well, that's not really a bit of an issue, is it, really, when they're engaged in their learning?
Yeah, it might be an issue, but it's a good issue to have, right?
It is.
It's a good issue to have and to defend. It is, again, when you ignite the minds and the hearts of kids, nothing stops them. And examples like these are multiple. Kids in high school in Simcoe County, spending days and days and weeks trying to figure out how to build a bridge with cardboard that can carry a person. And that's their life for the time, right? They spend the afternoons thinking about this problem, the weekends, all those kind of things. That's where meaningful learning happens. It's when you reach the state of flow that Mihail Csikszentmihalyi has been talking about, this state of feeling like everything else disappears, your sense of time disappears. You're so focused on figuring things out yourself that you forget about the ring bell and whether it's time for lunch, all those kind of things. That's what needs to be more frequent. So coming back to the question of pedagogical core, I think that's our role as educators. Listen, get to know our kids, and then use what we learn about their interests and their passions as a point of entry to learn to access also the formal knowledge in the curriculum in a way that allows them to learn it faster, in a way that will stay with them for the rest of their lives, and in a way that doesn't feel like the checklist, right? Now that it is more time, yes, it is more demanding, yes, but at the same time, what we see happening, I think, over and over again, is that when teachers start to let go of the control, of the absolute control of what's going on in the classroom, and allow kids not only to be learners, but also to be teachers, to support other colleagues, kids supporting the learning of other kids. then the job becomes even easier. We had many teachers in Mexico who, at some point would be late for school because they were moving, traveling to the school from far off distances. And they showed up in the classroom and the kids were already studying, right? They were all already learning and supporting each other because they knew how to do it. So when you start to distribute the responsibility and the control across the group, then you have a lot of possibilities for deep engagement, for one-on-one engagement with the kids who you think need most of your attention, but allowing the kids also to help each other, to teach each other. At the end of the day, kids learn better. We all learn better when we have to teach. And if you incorporate that in the work that you do, again, it may be a more intensive work, but it's way more satisfying. What I would guarantee people who engage in learning of this kind is that you will go to bed every night exhausted, but not burnt out. And that's a very important difference.
I was just going to say, there's a huge misconception that when you let students direct or be more self-determined in their learning, that teachers then are hands-off. And I totally disagree, because you have to have some structures in place for the learning to occur. So it's not like you just let the children go off and do their own thing. Can you just
that's a very good point. That's true. It is not that then you don't have any role to play. You actually have a more intensive role to play. And I think a very important part of the process has to be to set out practices that allow for accountability. So kids publicly demonstrating what they're learning and how they're learning. Make that part of the regular practice. Bringing parents so that they can see the kids articulate what they're learning and how. Expect the kids who learn and master a particular topic to become tutors to other students who may want to learn it as well. All those kind of things. So yes, it's about releasing control, but not about just letting kids do whatever they want. It is about creating a process and an environment that creates a sense of accountability as well, but not just accountability to your teacher, but accountability to your community, to your to other students, and that create the shared sense of responsibility that I'm choosing here what I'm doing, but I'm responsible for accounting for what I'm learning and how, not only to myself but also to my colleagues.
I'm just wondering, Santiago, did some students have to unlearn the way in which learning or being taught was done? Like, did some of the students feel like, they didn't have that direction because they had never been given the opportunity to self-direct?
That was the case both with students and with teachers. We are all used to asking the teacher to tell us what we need to do and we'll do it, right? It's usually the students who do better academically that struggle the most when given the freedom to figure out, or given the room to figure out by themselves what to do and how to do it, because they have learned to wait for indications from the teacher. That happened a lot, that there was pushback, but I think that's a healthy thing. The thing is, if you actually don't have pushback, you're really not changing anything, right?
That's right.
You need
to you're not questioned.
Exactly. So there was a lot of there was pushback, but the thing is, it didn't take long between they started to get comfortable with not knowing, because in the work, what you're asking folks is not only to figure out things by themselves, but you offer your support there as a tutor to help them get through it, right? It's not just figure it out by yourself, but I'm here to navigate the difficulties with you, and we will come out of this. That's my commitment. And when they experience this type of learning, which is not about getting a great grade or patting in the shoulder or a certificate, but when you experience the power of real, powerful, good, deep learning, that changes your life. That changes your life. I didn't say it before, but I think this summarizes it. I do think my basic proposition is learning is a practice of freedom. And I think that's the kind of learning we need to cultivate, that we need to develop, that we need to foster. The good news is that we all know that. We all know that what we know well, we learned under conditions of freedom. The bad news is that learning of that kind is very scarce in conventional schooling, because schooling was not designed to do that. We know how to be taught.
And I find there's more risk averse, right? They don't want to try that.
Yeah.
But I also want to ask, what role do school leaders play in liberating the learning for both the staff and the students? Where can they start?
Yeah, it is, you know, the way I talk about it is, the way I'd like to summarize the research on effective teaching and effective leadership, school leadership, and effective system leadership is the following. It's 3 sentences. The best teachers learn alongside their students. The best school leaders learn alongside their teachers. The best systems learn alongside their schools. So the role of a school leader, actually, your role as an educator, no matter where you are in the system, is to be what Michael Fullan calls a lead learner. Someone who creates the conditions for everybody to learn, and you join as a learner in the process of figuring out what's working and what's not working. So basically what the role of the leader is, first is create the conditions for teachers to learn about their practice in powerful ways. Provide exposure to more powerful ways of engaging with students, you know, in neighboring schools, in videos, whatever, but provide exposure to what is possible. And become a more active organizer, in the sense that when you start to liberate learning, which is how I like to call it, when you start to create conditions to liberate learning, you start to create friction with the environment around you. Again, because schooling was not designed to produce liberating learning. It was not designed to liberate learning. It's designed to constrain it, to stifle it, rather than unleashing it. So as a leader, you have to know that you will go against the grain. And part of your job is protecting teachers, creating conditions for learning and internal accountability, so that changing your practice becomes a shared responsibility. And then start to act upward as well. Connect with other leaders laterally to start to create some sense of collective responsibility and collective identity and power. And then leverage and change the system, or leverage and influence the system above you. So whenever there's a chance, or influence policy development, provide good feedback as to what are the things that will support the efforts to liberate learning versus and what's constraining it, and what needs to change. So it's a lot of directions that school leaders need to work into, need to influence. But summarizing it in what Andy Hargreaves called leadership from the middle, what you have to do is to liberate downward, just liberate those underneath you.
Yeah.
Connect laterally and leverage its influence upward. That's the idea of leadership from the middle. And I think those are the 3 directions that leaders will need to engage in and influence in order to support teachers and to support this larger agenda of liberating learning.
I think a lot of the time teachers get frustrated because they don't have a seat at that table, at the systems table, or they don't get heard, or they don't even have a voice a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the best systems we have come to learn about are doing a very good job in giving teachers roles as system leaders. Teachers as coaches or mentors to other teachers in other schools, or leadership roles within their school, but in a way that they stay connected with the district, for example, to establish a common agenda, to create what Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn call coherence, just a shared understanding of the nature of the work, shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. So the most kind of enlightened systems are already providing a lot of leadership opportunities and a lot of say to teachers. I think in systems when that's not the case, I don't think just expecting that suddenly some enlightened authority will come and do that for you is hopeless. I think what we need to start thinking about is, how do we create collective power amongst teachers who are advancing the kind of agenda that's moving education the direction where it has to go, and create power to influence, to sit yourself at the table rather than expecting to be invited.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk about social movement.
Yeah. Well, that's a big topic that I discuss in my book, in Liberating Learning, Educational Change, and Social Movement. The basic idea behind the social movement that I've been playing with and that I've been writing about is that liberating learning, or embracing learning as a practice of freedom, is a project of cultural change, of radical cultural change. We need to change in very deep way how we think about and how we practice teaching and learning and school leadership and system leadership. So what's required to liberate learning is deep and widespread cultural change. And throughout history, the most effective vehicles for widespread cultural change have been social movements. Think about the feminist movement, just organizing to change the terms of the relationship between men and women. A relationship that's historically like this, and that has to be more like this, right? That's the civil rights movement as well, trying to shift the nature of the link between white people and Black American people, right? And from relationships that are oppressive, of control, of authority, of hierarchical relationships, to relationships that are more like this. That's what social movements do. And liberating learning requires us to change that dynamic again of top-down separation between teachers and students, but also between policy and practice. Those are the two basic patterns of relationship that we need to change. And I believe that social movements offer a good metaphor, a good image for a paradigm that can help us reimagine how we think about and how we promote change, not through conventional policy. Our role is to foster, to ignite, to support, to sustain movements for pedagogical renewal to liberate learning. That's the idea. The good news is that this concept is not just theoretical elucubration. There are some beautiful examples, especially from the global south, that are operating like that have been operating like that, like social movements that have students at the center and that are creating very powerful pedagogical approaches that are spreading like wildfire in their countries. I'm talking about Colombia and Mexico and the state of Tamil Nadu in India and northern Egypt with their community schools. There are some very good examples of widespread pedagogical transformation that are that evolve and as social movements.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the networking you were talking about too. Within, when the project first started, you expanded. Was it because of the conversations that were going on between schools?
That was part of it. So the initial spread was through grassroots efforts. It was just teachers and parents and students just spreading the word. Really, what happened was a combination of grassroots expansion with the arrival of one of the members in our team to the National Ministry of Education, to the Department of Innovation. So what she started to do once in power was to start to bring in teachers and leaders from the movement, from the grassroots movement, to the national leadership. So she created what I like to call a radical bastion in the belly of the monster, right? So you bring in practitioners with expertise in changing teaching and learning fundamentally to decision-making positions at the national level. And then you leverage that to start all the infrastructure, all the political backing that comes with being part of the ministry to further spread the movement. So it was both from the top and from the bottom. I think those were the two major forces that converged that made it possible to reach 9,000 schools. Escuela in Colombia is another example. Again, a phenomenal model for multi-grade classrooms in rural Colombia that spread to 20,000 schools across Colombia. And thanks to the model, the kids in rural schools started to outperform kids in urban schools, outperform them. And at scale, 20,000 schools, right? Vicky Colbert, one of the co-founders, is the inaugural Yidan Prize awardee because of this development. So there are lots of good examples. The spread, if we want to reach huge numbers, we need to engage both the top and the bottom.
I was just going to say,
without it, it's very hard to sustain.
It can't be the grass. Yeah, exactly. I have a question for you, Santiago. This is from Chris Munro. Thank you, Santiago, for an engaging and stimulating conversation. I'm interested in the expert-teacher relationship. I wonder if you can say more about what you have identified as a necessary or emergent conditions for the best tutorial relationship that leads to genuine flourishing learning encounters between teachers.
Yeah. I will sum it up in the following sentence, and this is a basic tenet of the Learning Community Project that I was talking about from Mexico, and it's what my mentor, Gabriel Cámara, often says. Powerful learning occurs in the encounter between the interest of the learner and the capacity of the educator. So those are the two things you need to match: interest and capacity. So whatever you teach has to be something that you know very deeply. And that may not be the whole curriculum, and that's okay. Teach what you know very well and help kids understand it deeply. Don't worry about covering the whole curriculum, etc. But engage in teaching and in supporting kids to learn what you know deeply and you know very well. That doesn't mean, with this, I'm not implying that if you know 3 things, that's all your kids will be offered. The other part of the project, or the responsibility of a good expert teacher, is to start growing expertise in all the other areas that we're expecting kids to develop expertise. But I do believe that teaching things that you really don't know very well is a bit of a waste of time. I mean, you can get kids to pass an exam, to get good grades, all those kind of things, but in the longer run, it won't really do them any good. So engaging, on the part of the teacher, it's about making sure that your offering is those things that you know very well, those things that you have navigated the difficulty of figuring them out, and offer that. What you're offering is not just a topic, you're offering an experience of learning that you can help others navigate as well. And on the student side, what you have to do is to try to listen and to understand what students are interested in, and maybe start to find what are the things you know that can help satisfy or fulfill those interests. And if you don't know, then start increasing your expertise so that you learn about those things. Another thing that you can do is to combine, in your projects, things that you know very well, and that's your conventional offering for students, but also include moments where the kids, when they tell you that something they're interested about, or you're interested, you learn about something they're interested in, and you don't know about it. Make it a project to learn alongside them about it. You can say, I have no idea about that topic, but let's learn it together. And if I were you, this is how I would start. So what you do with that is also model the practice of learning, which, by the way, is something that we don't usually see in teachers doing. Modeling the practice of learning. We see a lot of teaching, but teachers modeling how to learn is one of the big gaps in our schooling. And I think it should be no surprise that students finish school, even those who do well and graduate to high school and going on to university, don't know how to learn on their own. It's not the problem of the students. It's, throughout my whole trajectory in school, I never saw a teacher showing me how to learn, showing me the practice of learning. And I think that's one of the biggest blind spots of schooling as we know it. So the more, just adding an extra point to the question, or to the answer, become the role model of learning, not the role model of knowing. Just take the opportunity to learn to model to your students what it looks like to learn something you don't know. And let them see you, just the same way as a carpenter lets an apprentice of carpenter, lets an apprentice see what it looks like to build furniture, or the way a scientist shows an apprentice how to do scientific research, or the way, a soccer player helps a kid learn how to play soccer, is by modeling the practice that you want the others to get better at. So make learning a visible practice. I think that's another kind of important thing to try out.
I think, Santiago, I brought in a Socratic circle within my year group, my year 5 group, and I brought in a few different things, and we kept reflecting on it, making different checklists while we were monitoring. They created all these through it. And then I said to them, I'm going to go and present all this information at a teach meet. They wrote what they got out of it. So it was actually their words that I was delivering at the teach meet and sharing what was going on in my classroom. So they actually gave me the feedback I needed as a teacher, but they also then had that reflection thing. We've talked about mentors, coaching, but you've had wonderful mentors in your life. Can we just finish off by talking a little bit about the importance of having mentors?
Yeah, I have been very lucky throughout my life. It may have to do with the loss of my father that I started to search for men who I could look up to, you know, to be kind of under their wing. One of those mentors was Gabriel Cámara, this phenomenal educator that continues to be my mentor. He's an older man. He just turned 90 in January this year. He was very good friends with Paulo Freire and Ivan Illich, two of the seminal kind of critical thinkers in education of the 70s. And he became the most important influence in my life when it comes to my thinking and my action, my work around education. So Gabriel Cámara is one, but then I started encountering more and more as I came to North America to do my master's, my PhD, and then as I landed in Toronto. But Richard Elmore from Harvard was a phenomenal mentor, an incredible friend as well. Marshall Gans at the Kennedy School, also at Harvard, phenomenal scholar of social movements. And more recently, Michael Fullan, who I continue to work with, and Andy Hargreaves. You know, through Michael, I had an opportunity also to get to know and develop good connections and relationship with phenomenal thinkers. You know, Andy Hargreaves, Dennis Shirley, lots of folks in the field. That's been incredible. That's been my most formative experience. And the one thing that's a bit upsetting to me is that there's so little opportunity for so many to encounter their mentors. And I think we need to start thinking more seriously about how to make those connections more intentional, because that's where you learn powerfully.
And that's what we did at ICSE last time. We connected some of the early career researchers with some mentors. And I know some people really enjoyed that experience. The other thing I was going to ask is, you said that they changed some of your beliefs and really had instrumental on your thinking. Did they tell you, or were they more curious and asking you questions for you to develop your own? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. I think some of them, I think I was eager to, when I met Gabriel, I was just eager to do something that could make the world a better place. So I was ready just to listen in to what he had to say. So that was part of it. But within that, he also created the environment where we had to figure out by ourselves a new solution to a problem that, you know, a solution that had not yet been invented. And in that sense, he gave us a lot of leeway to try out different things and to become accountable to our experiments, all those kind of things. So in a way, he was a good educator. He had some good things to tell us, and that I was very receptive to. But at the same time, he gave us a lot of leeway to learn about new things. What Michael has, you know, in my relationship with Michael Fullan, it's been just like an intensive course in systems thinking and whole system change. And that's been phenomenal. It's been next to one of the most powerful thinkers in large scale change, you know, in thinking with him. And again, there's a lot that I have to learn from him. Yes. But we also do this work that he calls curbside consulting, where, you know, he gets a question, a big dilemma that a system leader is facing, and he sends the dilemma to the group and say, tell me in 2 paragraphs, what should we answer? So he lets us play as well with the thinking, right? He gives us room.
Some autonomy in your own thinking.
Yeah, no, a lot of autonomy as well. Richard Elmore was incredibly influential in, you know, bringing in the idea of the pedagogical core to my attention, and in providing some of the concepts that really crystallized my thinking as I was, you know, navigating doctoral life and trying to make sense of what I wanted to study, what my thesis was going to be, etc. Richard Elmore was the first one to call the work we were doing in Mexico a social movement. Right. He was the first one to say, this is not just a program, it's a social movement. And that concept for me just crystallized in incredible ways. Lots of things that had been feeling very scattered as I was doing my thesis. And I said, this is it. This is the way I had been struggling to try to fit the work into existing frameworks that were insufficient, that were not capturing what I really wanted to capture, and Richard provided that moment of crystallization,
I was
of,
going to say
of
clarity.
enlightenment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then Marshall Gans was very influential in helping me think about culture change and leadership in social movements as well. So it's been a combination. I have learned a lot from what my mentors have told me, what they have to say, but I have had the luck to develop a link with them that also allows me to play with ideas,
And
with
have
flexibility.
conversations, open conversations
And
as well.
and imagine what it is like just to get feedback from your idols, right? I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I think everyone should have access to these kind of opportunities. I feel very privileged, but I don't feel very comfortable knowing that this is not the regular experience of most people I know and the most people around the world. Just having an opportunity to connect to people to people you really admire and learn from them.
Yeah,
And
this is the conversation I had with Elmore while we were climbing up the Sydney Harbour Bridge is,
for example,
the mentors that we need in our lives, especially women need, I
yes.
think having that support and mentoring as well through
Yeah,
your
yeah,
career is really
yeah.
important.
And that's, for me, that's an important next step. I think we are in times when we need more women in charge. We need more women in charge. It is so clear to me. I mean, look at the mess we have created, and it's mostly led by men. Most of my mentors so far have been men.
Yeah.
I think, again, that may have to do with my own story of losing my father when I was very young. But one pending area for me is to be more intentional about finding mentorship in women. I'm starting to do that. Mary Jean Gallagher from the Ontario Ministry of Education, a phenomenal leader, is one of them. Vicky Colbert from Escuela Nueva is another. But that's an area that I want to develop more intentionally as well. Mentorship with women.
Awesome.
And again, I think we will need more women in charge if we are to build a better world. Otherwise, we're just heading to the precipice at full speed.
I want to thank you today for your time, Santiago, but we've got one more question from Stephen Culver. He says, can there be a movement towards more traditional monodirectional teaching? Does this function within the same way?
Yeah. The one thing to say, yes, I think movements are not inherently good. There are very vicious movements. Their movements are not by themselves or by definition virtuous. And culture can change for the good or for bad. So we need to be very clear about purpose. Why are we educating? I think we need to define that very clearly. And when I talk about movements or the movements that have inspired my thinking around how to change education are movements that are working collectively to build a more human world, more humane relationships.
Yeah.
The feminist movement, the civil rights movement, the immigrant farmer movement in California, the indigenous movement across all Latin America, but more growing more and more in the global north, in Australia, in North America. So that's the kind of movements that I take as my point of reference. And what I think it's a matter of purpose. So yes, there are movements that can lead us in a much more conservative direction. We are seeing many of those spreading like wildfire. We're seeing white supremacy spreading in ways that are incredibly dangerous. So I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of purpose. We need to define clearly what kind of education we want to pass on to our children. And the way I like to say it, it's just four things. We want an education, or I want an education for my children and our children that allows our kids to know themselves, to learn by themselves, to take care of others, and to better the world. I think that's purpose. And I think we need to define that very clearly, because without a clear purpose that can galvanize movement in the right direction, we may end up defaulting into something much worse than what we know. And that can be dangerous. So I think the question of purpose is very important. We need to define it as clearly as possible. And I believe, and I like to support efforts to purposes that lead us more closely bring us closer to our shared humanity. That's it. Right now, we're living in dangerous times. It is very dangerous times. And I do think that the human project is at stake. It is up for grabs. And the default, if we don't go intentionally about building a more humane world, societies, economies, the default will be further dehumanization, and we have reached a level that's going to be very hard to maintain in terms of social cohesion, political harmony, all those kind of things. So I think we need to be very intentional about knowing that our work purpose, and knowing that our work as educators can support or discourage a more humane society and the planet. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Santiago. I could talk to you for another hour, but the time is up. We look forward to you coming to Australia at some point so that we can hear you live.
Oh, I would love to do that. I was in Melbourne last year. I loved it. I loved it. And I would love to be in Australia again. A phenomenal country. I would love to be there again. So let's make it happen. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Santiago. And any of the books that you mentioned today, we'll have those available all on the website for people to have access to. And of course, your book, Liberating Learning.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone who joined. Take care. Have a good night.
Bye.
And a good day.